That cold morning, no one expected a confession to change everything. What started as a simple question became a story the whole family tried to explain, and few had the courage to tell. Before we begin, subscribe and turn on the bell. Here, we share the confessions people only dare to say in front of God, and the quiet choices that save a soul. The rain had just stopped, leaving the air thick with that damp chill that seeps into your bones. I remember standing in the doorway of my own home, the one I'd paid for with decades of scrimping and saving, watching my daughter-in-law drag 2 heavy suitcases across the gravel driveway. Her face was set, lips pressed thin, but there was a flicker in her eyes, defiance maybe, or just exhaustion. The porch light buzzed faintly overhead, casting long shadows that made the whole scene feel like something out of a forgotten memory. My son trailed behind her, hands shoved deep in his pockets, avoiding my gaze. He hadn't said a word since they pulled up unannounced, the car's engine still ticking as it cooled. "Did you ask the owner for permission?" I asked her, my voice steady but laced with the weight of everything unsaid. The words hung there, sharp as the gravel under her wheels. She stopped, suitcases thudding to the ground, and turned to face me. For a moment, the world narrowed to just us three, me in my worn housecoat, the faded floral print clinging to my frame like an old regret, her with rain-dampened hair sticking to her forehead, him shifting his weight like a boy caught in a lie. Her mouth opened, then closed. "This is my home too, Margaret," she said finally, but there was no fire in it, just a weary echo. My home. The phrase twisted in my gut like a dull knife. I'd let them move in 2 years ago after their apartment flooded, and the baby was on the way. It was supposed to be temporary. A bridge until they got on their feet. But temporary stretched into months, then years, with my grocery money disappearing into their emergencies and my quiet evenings shattered by arguments that leaked through the thin walls. I stepped forward, the wooden porch creaking under my slippers. The air smelled of wet earth and the faint, acrid tang of exhaust. "Your home?" I repeated, softer now, but the edge was there. "I signed the papers. I pay the mortgage every month while you two—" I trailed off, glancing at my son. His face flushed, but he said nothing, just stared at the ground as if it might swallow him whole. She straightened, gripping the suitcase handles like lifelines. "We're leaving because of you. Is that what this is?" Her voice cracked, and I saw the tears welling. But I couldn't let them soften me. Not after the whispers I'd overheard last night on the phone, the ones about selling the house out from under me, about how I was holding them back. I'd raised him better than this, or so I'd thought. The silence stretched, broken only by the distant call of a crow in the oak tree out back. My hands trembled at my sides, but I clasped them together, feeling the cool metal of my wedding ring, widowed 10 years now, and still wearing it like a shield. This house was all I had left of that life, of the promises I'd kept while others drifted away. And now, here they were, packing up as if my generosity was a burden they could shrug off. "You think you can just walk in and out like this?" I said, my voice dropping to a whisper that carried more than a shout ever could. "After everything, the bills I covered when your job fell through, the nursery I painted myself because you couldn't be bothered?" She flinched, and for a split second I saw the girl I'd once welcomed, young, hopeful, marrying my boy with stars in her eyes. But that girl was gone, replaced by someone who saw me as an obstacle, a wallet to empty before moving on. My son finally spoke, his words muffled, like he was pulling them from somewhere deep and reluctant. "Mom, it's not like that. We just need space." Space! The word landed like a slap. Space in my house? The one where I'd bandaged his scraped knees and taught him to tie his shoes? I turned to him, searching his face for the boy I knew, but all I found was evasion, the same quiet neglect that had eroded our bond over the years. The suitcases sat there zipped tight, labels from some budget airline peeling at the edges. She bent to adjust one, her knuckles white, and I realized this was it, the moment everything fractured, not with screams or shattered glass, but with the simple act of leaving, as if my life, my home, my dignity were things to pack away and discard. I didn't move to stop her. Instead, I watched as she hauled the first suitcase toward the car, the wheels crunching over the stones. My son followed, loading them into the trunk with mechanical precision. The trunk slammed shut, a final punctuation. She slid into the passenger seat without another word, and he paused at the driver's door, looking back at me one last time. "I'm sorry," he murmured, but it was too late for sorries. The engine roared to life, headlights cutting through the dim morning light, and they drove off, leaving me alone on the porch with the echo of tires on wet pavement. That was the beginning of it. Father, or at least the moment I could no longer pretend. I sat there until the chill drove me inside, the empty house closing around me like a too large coat. The kitchen clock ticked steadily, mocking the silence. It was then, in the quiet that followed, that I knew I had to talk to someone. Not family, they'd side with him, always had. Not friends who saw only the surface. But you, in this small office, with its worn leather chairs and the faint scent of polished wood, where confessions like mine find a place to breathe. You leaned forward slightly, your eyes kind but unyielding, the lamplight pooling on the desk between us. "Tell me more," you said simply, and so I did, unraveling the threads of how it came to this. How love turned to dependence, and dependence to something far uglier. But that morning, with the suitcases rolling away, it felt like the end of everything I'd held on to. Little did I know, it was just the crack in the foundation, the one that would bring the whole fragile structure down. It started small, like most erosions do, tiny cracks you tell yourself will mend with time. I'd always been the steady one in the family. Father, the widow who kept the lights on after my husband passed too soon from that heart attack in the garage, oil still on his hands from fixing the old Ford. The house was our nest egg, paid off bit by bit from my nursing shifts at the clinic downtown, the ones that left my feet aching and my back knotted by dawn. I never complained. It was what you did for love, for the life we'd built. Our son David was the light of it all, bright-eyed, full of promise when he graduated high school, heading off to community college with dreams of engineering. But life has a way of grinding those dreams down, doesn't it? Jobs lost to recessions, loans piling up like autumn leaves. He met Elena at a coffee shop near the campus, or so he told it, a whirlwind romance. Her laugh cutting through the steam of lattes, her dark hair falling like a curtain when she leaned in to share a story. She was younger than him by a few years, fresh out of beauty school, full of that restless energy that makes you think anything's possible. They married in a simple ceremony at the county courthouse, me in my best dress, and dabbing at my eyes with a tissue as they exchanged vows under the fluorescent lights. I was happy for them, truly, invited them over for Sunday dinners, watched as Elena's belly swelled with the news of the baby. But then the flood came, the burst pipe in their rental apartment, water ruining everything from the crib they'd just assembled to the boxes of her salon supplies. "Mom," David called that night, his voice tight over the phone, "we're soaked. The landlord's not helping. Can we crash for a bit?" Of course I said yes. What mother wouldn't? The guest room was empty anyway, gathering dust since David moved out at 18. I cleared space in the garage for their wet things, aired out the linens, even picked up a second-hand bassinet from the church rummage sale. They arrived with garbage bags of clothes and that haunted look people get when misfortune hits hard. Elena hugged me tight, whispering thanks, her perfume mixing with the scent of mildew. David clapped me on the shoulder, promising, "Just until we sort it out, Mom. A month, tops." I believed him because I wanted to, because family was all I had left. And turning them away felt like betraying the vows I'd made in my own marriage, the ones about sheltering those you love. The first weeks were a blur of adjustment. I'd come home from my shifts to find Elena napping on the couch, her feet up, the TV murmuring infomercials. David was out job hunting, or so he said, but the days stretched without much to show. I didn't mind cooking extra, stews simmering on the stove, cornbread from my mother's recipe. It felt good to have noise in the house again, the clatter of plates, Elena's soft questions about the neighborhood while she scrolled her phone. But then the baby came. Little Mia, with her tuft of dark hair and cries that pierced the night like sirens. Sleep became a luxury I surrendered without a fight. Rocking her in the nursery, I'd painted pale yellow, the fumes lingering in my clothes for days. Money was the first thread to fray. David's interviews dried up. The economy was shifting, factories closing, and his resume gathered dust on the kitchen table. Elena's salon job didn't pan out, too far to commute with the baby, she said, and the hours clashed with feedings. "We'll manage," David assured me one evening. As we sat at the oak table, I'd refinished myself, the lamplight casting warm pools on the scarred wood. But managing meant dipping into my savings for formula, diapers, that unexpected car repair when the brakes gave out. I handed over the checks quietly, telling myself it was temporary, that they were family. Pride kept me from asking for rent. Instead, I picked up overtime at the clinic, ignoring the ache in my knees on the linoleum floors. The erosion deepened in the small things, the ones you overlook, until they're habits. Elena started redecorating without a word, my floral curtains swapped for bold geometrics from the discount store, the china cabinet rearranged to showcase her crystal collection, a wedding gift she'd brought over. "It brightens the place," she'd say with a smile, and I'd nod, biting back the comment that this was my place, my choices. David, once so attentive, grew distant, his phone glued to his hand during meals, laughing at texts I couldn't see. Arguments would flare in their room late at night, muffled voices rising over the baby monitor I'd insisted on, words like "stuck" and "dragging us down" slipping through the static. I'd lie awake in my bed, the ceiling fan whirring softly, wondering if I was the us they meant. Dependency wove itself tighter. When my retirement checks came, they'd borrow for gas, for Mia's doctor visits, for Elena's online courses she never finished. I tracked it loosely in a notebook, the pages filling with neat columns. $200 for the electric bill, $150 for groceries, but asking for repayment felt like accusing them, so I let it slide, enduring the quiet resentment that built like pressure in a sealed jar. Holidays came and went. Thanksgiving with Elena's family visiting, their eyes appraising the house like it was a showroom, whispers about how generous I was being. David's sister, my other child, called from across the state, praising how I'd saved them, but her tone carried that edge, the one that made me feel like a charity case rather than kin. By the second year, the lines had blurred entirely. The house felt less like mine and more like a way station, my routines upended by their chaos, toys scattered on the living room rug. My herb garden trampled when Mia toddled out back unsupervised. Elena would sigh when I suggested boundaries, like locking the liquor cabinet after a bottle vanished, her eyes rolling as if I were the intruder. "It's family, Margaret," she'd say, the word laced with obligation rather than warmth. David nodded along, his silence a complicity that stung deeper than words. I'd retreat to the kitchen at odd hours, nursing a cup of tea under the fluorescent light, the clock's tick marking the slow surrender of my dignity. Love, I told myself, meant endurance, swallowing the neglect, funding the life they built atop mine. You see it now, Father, how it crept in. The generosity that started as a lifeline became chains, invisible but heavy. They weren't monsters, not at first, just people leaning too hard, taking what was offered without seeing the cost. But by the time those suitcases appeared, the weight had tipped, and I was the one buckling under it all. I didn't realize then how deep the manipulation ran, disguised as gratitude, as family ties that bound tighter than they should. And then, Father, came the judgments, the ones that twisted the knife deeper, making me question if I was the villain in my own story. It started with the family, of course, the ones who should have known better. David's aunt, my late husband's sister, called the day after they left, her voice crisp over the line. The receiver heavy in my hand as I stood by the window, watching rain streak the glass again. "Margaret, what on earth did you say to them? Elena's beside herself, says you threw them out like yesterday's trash." Threw them out. The words echoed in the empty living room, where Mia's abandoned toys still littered the floor like forgotten confetti. I tried to explain, the suitcases, the whispers about selling the house, the way my checks had vanished into their needs, but she cut me off with a sigh, the kind that carries years of unspoken grievances. "You're too sensitive, dear. Always have been. They're young, struggling. You can't expect them to be perfect." Too sensitive. It was the refrain I'd heard since girlhood, from my own mother when I'd cry over a scraped knee, from neighbors when I grieved too openly after the funeral. Now it painted me as the fragile one, the elder whose nerves frayed over nothing. I hung up, the click of the phone like a door slamming in my chest, and sank into the armchair by the fireplace, its cushions sagging under me. The mantel held photos, David's graduation, Elena's wedding smile, Mia's baptism, all frozen in happier frames. But reality had seeped in, staining them. The community piled on next, subtle at first, like fog rolling in from the lake. At church that Sunday, the pews creaked under the weight of familiar faces, the organ's low hum filling the air before the sermon. Mrs. Hargrove, who'd known me since nursing school, leaned over after the service, her perfume sharp and floral, her Bible clutched like a shield. "Heard about the trouble at home, Margaret. Family's everything, isn't it? But sometimes we old folks get confused, start seeing shadows where there aren't any." Confused. The word landed soft, but it burned, implying my mind was slipping, that the suitcases were a hallucination born of loneliness. I nodded, murmuring something about prayer, but inside, the isolation grew. A quiet tide pulling me under, the prayer circle ladies whispered later, over coffee in the fellowship hall, steam rising from styrofoam cups. Poor David, stuck between his wife and his mother. She's always been a bit dramatic, hasn't she? Demanding her space now after letting them stay so long. Dramatic. It echoed in my thoughts as I drove home. The wipers slapping rhythmically against the drizzle, the radio tuned low to hymns that offered no solace. I'd never raised my voice, never demanded more than what was mine, yet here I was, cast as the hysteric, the one unraveling while they played the victims. Elena's family joined the chorus soon after, her mother phoning from the city, her tone laced with that polished sympathy reserved for awkward kin. "Elena's devastated, Margaret, says you accused her of freeloading right there on the porch. We're all worried about you. Living alone like that, it does things to a person." Accused? I'd only asked for permission, for acknowledgement of the boundaries they'd blurred. But to them, I was ungrateful for the joy they'd brought, the baby who'd filled the house with life before emptying it of peace. "You're lucky to have had them," she added, as if my solitude was a punishment I deserved. Lucky. The line went dead, and I sat at the kitchen table, the wooden surface cool under my palms, staring at the stack of unpaid bills I'd hidden in a drawer, reminders of the luck that had nearly cost me everything. Society at large sealed the misreading through the casual judgments that seep into everyday corners. The bank teller, when I went to check my dwindling savings, raised an eyebrow at the withdrawals, her voice dropping to that confidential murmur behind the plexiglass. Family troubles. Happens more than you think with the older generation. Get a little set in your ways. Start pushing back. Set in my ways. As if clinging to my home, my security, was a flaw rather than a right. Friends from the clinic, over lunch in the break room, the smell of reheated soup hanging heavy, shook their heads when I confided in fragments. You're too independent, Margaret. That's your problem. Let them help you for once. It's what family's for. But their help had been one-sided. A drain masked as support, and voicing that made me crazy, the eccentric widow spinning tales of betrayal. Even David fed into it, his texts arriving like sporadic rain, short bursts that pattered, then stopped. Mom, Elena's really upset. Says you're blowing it out of proportion. Can we talk? Blowing it out of proportion. Each message chipped away, making me doubt the evidence in my own notebook, the faded receipts tucked away. His sister, visiting briefly from her job upstate, sat with me one evening on the back porch, the swing creaking under us, fireflies flickering in the dusk. You're being too hard on them, Mom. They're just trying to build a life. Ungrateful after all you've given? Come on, that's not like you. Not like me. As if the woman who'd endured years of quiet sacrifice was now the stranger, the one who'd forgotten her place. Father, you listened as I laid it out, the lamplight in your office casting gentle shadows on the bookshelves lined with worn volumes. The clock on the wall ticked softly, marking the pauses where words failed. They see what suits them, you said quietly. Not a judgment, but a mirror held steady. And in that seeing, they erase your truth. Erase. The word settled heavy, like the fog outside the window, where streetlights blurred in the mist. I nodded, feeling the weight of those misreadings press down. The family who'd recast me as the obstacle, the community that viewed my stand as senility, society that dismissed endurance as excess. It isolated me further, a silent exile in my own life, where loyalty was demanded but never returned. Yet in the telling here with you, the fog began to thin, revealing the outlines of what I'd overlooked. My own voice, buried but not broken. Comment where you're watching from. I want to know how far these stories of courage and loyalty can travel. The office felt smaller that afternoon, the air thick with the scent of old books and the faint polish of the wooden cross on the wall. Rain pattered against the window again, a steady rhythm that matched the pulse in my temples as I sat across from you, Father. My hands folded in my lap to still their trembling. The chair's leather creaked under me, worn smooth from countless confessions like mine, stories of quiet fractures in families that no one sees coming. You'd poured us tea earlier, the steam curling up from the chipped mugs like unspoken regrets, and now the liquid had cooled untouched on the desk between us. I stared at the steam's ghost on the surface, tracing patterns that dissolved too quickly. You've carried this alone for too long, Margaret, you said, your voice even, like the calm before a hymn. No rush, no probing, just those words, simple as bread, breaking the silence I'd built around myself. I nodded, feeling the knot in my throat loosen just a fraction. Outside, the world blurred through the streaked glass, parked cars glistening under the downpour, a lone figure hurrying past with an umbrella snapping in the wind. In here, though, time slowed, allowing the pieces I'd held back to surface. I started with the boundaries, or the lack of them, the way I'd let them seep into every corner without a fight. It was the little permissions I never asked for, I confessed, my voice barely above the rain. Like when Elena rearranged the living room without a word, shoving my late husband's armchair into the corner like it was clutter. I said nothing, told myself it was her space too, but it wasn't, was it? Not really. You leaned back slightly, your eyes steady on mine, the lamplight catching the silver in your hair. Boundaries aren't walls, Margaret, you replied softly. They're lines drawn in truth to protect what's sacred. Yours blurred because love asked it, but love doesn't demand erasure. Erasure. The word echoed what you'd said last time about how they misread me, but now it cut deeper, naming the manipulation I'd felt but never voiced. I shifted in the chair, the fabric of my skirt whispering against my skin, and told you about the finances, the notebook I'd kept hidden in the kitchen drawer, its pages filled with dates and amounts that added up to more than I could bear. David would come to me after a bad day at interviews, his shoulders slumped, and say, "Just this once, Mom, for Mia's shots." Elena would add her plea later, eyes wide, promising to pay it back from her next tip. But the next never came, and I'd hand it over anyway, watching my savings dwindle like sand through fingers. Your nod was measured, no surprise in it, just acknowledgement. "That's the heart of it," you said. Manipulation wears the mask of need, but it thrives on your silence. They didn't force your hand. They relied on your goodness to keep it open. Recognizing that isn't accusation, it's clarity. Clarity. It settled over me like the tea's warmth might have if I'd sipped it. The rain intensified, drumming harder on the pane, and I leaned forward, elbows on my knees, the mug's handle cool against my palm. Dignity. That was the next thread, the one I'd let fray until I barely recognized myself in the mirror each morning. Lines etched deeper around my eyes from nights of worry. I felt like a fool, Father, enduring it all for the sake of family. Cleaning up after their messes, biting my tongue when Eleanor snapped about the laundry piling up, my laundry in my washer. But where does endurance end and self-respect begin? You paused, folding your hands on the desk. The faint lines of your knuckles standing out in the light. Dignity is God's gift to you, Margaret, not something to surrender at the altar of others' convenience. Truth isn't cruel, it's the foundation. Speak it not to wound, but to reclaim what's yours. You've given enough, now guard it as fiercely as you guarded them. I absorbed that, the words weaving through the ache in my chest, steadying the storm inside. The office clock ticked onward, its hands marking seconds that felt like years of quiet surrender. You didn't preach. Instead, you asked a question that pierced gently. What would it look like practically to draw that line? I hesitated, glancing at the window where droplets raced each other down the glass, mirroring the choices I'd avoided. Telling them no, maybe. Keeping track, not just in a notebook, but sharing it with someone who can advise. You nodded again, reaching for a notepad from the drawer, its pages crisp and unlined. Documentation matters, you said, your tone practical, like a neighbor offering directions. Not for war, but for protection. Note the dates, the amounts, any agreements, spoken or implied. If tensions rise, it shields you, shows the reality beyond their stories. And consider a trusted ally, a financial advisor from the parish, or even locking your accounts to prevent further draws. It's not about distrust, it's stewardship of what God entrusted to you. Stewardship. The concept lingered, simple yet profound, as the rain eased to a drizzle outside, the world sharpening into focus. I thought of the house keys I'd given them freely, the joint access to my bank that now felt like an open wound. What if they see it as betrayal? I whispered, the fear surfacing like a shadow in the room's corners. Your response was quiet, unyielding. True family honors boundaries, not resents them. If they push back, that's their choice, not a reflection of your worth. Protect your peace, Margaret. It's the quiet courage that honors the dignity we all carry. We sat there a moment longer, the silence companionable now, broken only by the settling patter of rain. The tea had gone cold entirely, but something in me warmed, a resolve, fragile but real, born of this counsel. You'd named the manipulation without judgment, emphasized the truth as a lifeline, and offered steps that felt achievable, not overwhelming. As I rose to leave, the chair sighing in relief, I felt the first stirrings of that moral boundary taking shape, not a fortress, but a line in the sand, drawn with the steady hand of clarity. The door clicked shut behind me, and the hallway's dim light guided me out, but the words stayed, a quiet guide through the gathering dusk. The days after that session with you blurred into a haze of routine, Father, the kind that numbs rather than heals. I'd wake to the alarm's insistent beep at 5:30, the bedroom curtains filtering the grey dawn light into pale stripes across the quilt. Coffee brewed in the percolator, its gurgle the only sound in the kitchen where David's empty chair loomed like a ghost. I'd sip it black, staring at the calendar on the fridge, marked with shifts at the clinic, circled dates for Mia's birthday that now felt like accusations. The house echoed with absence. No cries from the nursery, no thud of footsteps overhead, no Eleanor's laughter spilling from the living room like an unwelcome guest. They'd been gone a week, the guest room stripped bare, sheets folded neatly in the linen closet as if erasing their presence could mend the frayed edges of my heart. But the calls started, persistent as the autumn wind rattling the shutters. David's number on the caller ID twice a day, the phone vibrating against the oakside table like a trapped insect. I'd let it ring, watching the screen light up. His name, a silent plea. Elena texted instead, short bursts that landed heavy. Mia asks for Grandma. Can we come get her things? Or, sharper, this is ridiculous, Margaret. We're family. Family? The word twisted now, no longer a shelter, but a snare. I'd read them in the quiet evenings, the lamp's glow pooling on the armrest, my thumb hovering over reply before deleting drafts that begged for understanding. Your words echoed in those moments, boundaries as truth, dignity as stewardship. I clutched the notebook from the kitchen drawer, its pages dog-eared, the columns of borrowed sums staring back like unpaid debts. It was on a Thursday, the air crisp with the scent of fallen leaves as I drove to the bank after my shift. The clinic had been relentless, flu season swelling the waiting room, patients coughing into sleeves, their eyes weary with unspoken burdens. My scrub smelled of antiseptic, the fabric chafing my skin as I gripped the steering wheel, the radio murmuring old standards that spoke of lost love and quiet resolve. The bank loomed at the edge of town, its brick facade unyielding under the overcast sky. Parking lot half empty save for a few sedans nosing in like hesitant visitors. I sat there a minute, engine idling, rain spotting the windshield in fat drops that distorted the neon sign. What would it look like practically? Your question from the office lingered, a compass in the fog. Inside, the lobby hummed softly, tellers tapping keys behind the counter, the faint whir of printers from back rooms, a clock ticking above the deposit slips. I approached Mrs. Ellis, the branch manager who'd handled my mortgage since the beginning, her glasses perched on the end of her nose, hair pinned in a sensible bun. "Margaret," she greeted, her voice warm but professional, gesturing to the office with its frosted glass door. We settled at her desk, the chair stiff under me, a vase of silk flowers adding a touch of false cheer. I slid the notebook across, its cover worn from my nightly reviews, and explained in measured tones the joint account I'd opened for emergencies 2 years back, the automatic transfers that had siphoned my retirement like a slow leak. "David and Elena," I said, my voice steady despite the flutter in my chest. "They've been drawing from it without full discussion. I need to close it, remove their access." She nodded, flipping through the pages, her pen clicking softly as she noted figures. No judgment in her eyes, just the quiet efficiency of someone who'd seen families fracture over less. "This is straightforward," she replied, pulling up my file on the computer screen, its glow casting blue shadows on her face. "We'll freeze any pending transfers today. Nothing goes out after this. And the house title? It's solely in your name. so no worries there unless you've added co-signers. The house. The whispers I'd overheard replayed, their late-night talk of equity, of flipping it for a fresh start once I was settled elsewhere. I hadn't added them, thank God, but the fear had rooted deep. "Can we check for any liens or inquiries?" I asked, leaning forward, the desk's edge pressing into my arms. Minutes later the forms were signed, black ink drying on crisp paper, my signature a line drawn firm. As she processed it, the outer lobby door chimed, and I glanced back to see a young couple enter, arguing in hushed tones over a checkbook. Their words muffled, but the tension clear. It could have been us, years ago, before the lines blurred. Mrs. Ellis handed me the confirmation slip, a single sheet that felt heavier than gold. "You're protected now," she said simply, her smile brief. "Call if anything changes." I nodded, folding it into my purse, the leather creaking as I stood. Outside, the rain had steadied to a drizzle, misting my face as I walked to the car, keys jingling in my pocket like a small victory. That evening, back in the kitchen, the weight shifted. I sat at the table, the slip spread before me under the pendant light, its bulb humming faintly. The phone buzzed again, David this time, voicemail lighting up. I played it, his tone laced with urgency. "Mom, Elena's upset. We need to talk about the account. Bills are piling up here." Piling up, as if my endurance was an endless well. I deleted it without reply, then pulled out my own checkbook, balancing the reduced figures with a pencil scratch. No more automatic drains, no more silent funding of their choices. The realization bloomed quiet, like dawn breaking over the ridge. I won't finance my own humiliation anymore. It wasn't dramatic. No confrontation, no raised voices echoing through the empty halls. Just that small act, the closing of a door I'd left ajar too long. But it changed everything, Father. Cracking the shell of endurance I'd worn like armor, the house felt mine again, its walls holding stories of my own making, not theirs. I locked the side door that night, the bolt sliding home with a decisive click, and for the first time in months, sleep came without the churn of worry. Your counsel had planted the seed. This was the first green shoot, fragile but insistent, pushing toward light. The retaliation came not with a storm, but with the steady drip of accusations that eroded the fragile peace I'd begun to claim. It started the morning after I'd frozen the account, Father, as I stood at the kitchen sink, rinsing the breakfast dishes, the soapy water warm against my chapped hands. Sunlight slanted through the window, catching the dust motes in lazy spirals. But the calm shattered when the phone rang. Elena's number this time, insistent as a heartbeat. I wiped my hands on the dish towel, its faded checks worn thin from years of use, and answered, bracing for the familiar plea. Instead, her voice sliced through, sharp and laced with hurt. "How could you, Margaret? Locking us out like that? Mia's pediatrician bill came due, and now the bank's saying no funds. You're killing us, your own granddaughter." Guilt flooded in first, that old tide I'd navigated so many times before. I gripped the counter's edge, the formica cool and unyielding under my palms, picturing little Mia's face, her chubby cheeks flushed from a fever I'd once soothed with cool cloths and murmured prayers. "It wasn't meant to hurt her," I said quietly, my voice steady despite the ache blooming in my chest. "The money was for emergencies in this house, not everything." But Elena pressed on, her words tumbling faster, painting me as the villain who'd turned stingy in my old age. "David's devastated. He trusted you. We're family, or at least I thought we were. Now we're scraping by in this motel, counting change for diapers. Is that what you want? To see us on the street?" The line crackled with her ragged breaths, and I hung up slowly, the receiver heavy in my hand, as if her guilt had seeped into it. Outside, the neighbor's dog barked once, sharp and lonely, echoing the isolation settling deeper. By afternoon, the escalation crept into texts. David's this time. A barrage that lit up my phone on the clinic's breakroom table, the scent of stale coffee mingling with the microwave's hum. "Mum, this is crazy. Elena's crying all night. You know we need that money for rent. Call the bank, fix it." Then another, "You're being selfish. After all we've done for you, keeping you company, fixing the porch light." Done for me. The words blurred on the screen, my thumb hovering as I sat there, the plastic chair creaking under me, colleagues' chatter fading to a distant murmur. They'd taken more than they'd given, but doubt wormed in, whispering that maybe I was the one who'd misread it all. I didn't reply, pocketing the phone as my shift called, but the messages lingered like smoke, clouding the resolve I'd found the day before. Public humiliation followed swiftly, as if they'd rehearsed it in the motel's dim light. Elena's mother posted first on that neighborhood Facebook group I'd joined years ago for recipe swaps and lost pet alerts, the one with its quaint photos of bake sales and autumn leaves. I saw it that evening, scrolling on my laptop at the kitchen table, the screen's glow harsh against the gathering dusk, heartbroken for my daughter and grandbaby. Kicked out of their home by the one person who should protect them. Greed in family is the worst kind. Prayers for healing. No names, but the details matched. Suitcases on gravel, a porch confrontation. Comments poured in, "That's awful. Some people get bitter with age. Sounds like hoarding. Hope the little one's okay." I closed the laptop with a snap, the wood echoing in the empty room. Heat rising to my face as if the whole town stared. The next day at the clinic, Mrs. Hargrove from church was waiting in exam 3, her eyes narrowing over her magazine as I took her blood pressure. "Saw something troubling online, Margaret. Everything all right at home?" Her tone dripped concern, but the undercurrent was judgment, implying I'd cracked under loneliness. The smear spread like ink in water. David's sister called from upstate, her voice tight over the line as I stood by the living room window, watching cars crawl past in the evening traffic. "Mom, what the hell? Elena's mom is blasting this everywhere. Says you're unstable, locking them out and freezing money. People are talking, family group chats blowing up." Unstable. The word hit like a cold draft through the panes, evoking images of me as the confused elder, rambling about boundaries no one else saw. "It's not like that," I protested, but she sighed, the sound heavy with exasperation. "Then why not help them? You're alone anyway, might as well keep the family close. This makes you look heartless." Heartless. I paced after hanging up. The carpet muffling my steps, the phone clutched like a shield. That night sleep evaded me, the ceiling fan's whir mocking the whirl in my mind. Visions of whispers at the grocery store, sidelong glances at church, my reputation fraying thread by thread. Threats came next, veiled at first, then bolder. David showed up unannounced 2 days later, pounding on the door as thunder rumbled distant, the sky bruising purple. I opened it a crack, chain engaged, rain misting the threshold. His face was drawn, stubble shadowing his jaw, eyes red-rimmed. "Mom, open up. We need to talk." I shook my head, heart pounding against my ribs. "Not like this, David." He leaned in, voice dropping to a hiss. "Fine, but if you don't unfreeze that account, we'll have to get lawyers involved. Elena's talking about contesting the house, says you promised it to us once Mia was born." Contesting. The word chilled me, evoking courtrooms I'd only seen on television, papers shuffling like dry leaves. "You know that's not true," I whispered, but he pressed on. "And your mental state. After Dad died, you were off. Witnesses could say you're not thinking straight. Forcing us out. Starving the baby, it's elder abuse in reverse." Mental state, the accusation twisted, implying I was the fragile one, unraveling while they played the victims. He slammed his palm against the frame, the wood vibrating, before turning away into the downpour, leaving me to bolt the door, breath shallow in the dim hall. Intimidation peaked with Elena's final call that week, her voice trembling but edged with steel as I sat on the porch swing, the chains creaking softly in the breeze. "You'll end up alone, Margaret. No one wants a bitter old woman. David's done. Says you're poisoning what's left of our family. Mia will grow up hearing how Grandma turned her back. Alone." The threat wrapped around my throat, the swing's motion slowing as tears pricked unbidden. The oak tree loomed overhead, leaves rustling like judgments, and I hung up, the phone slipping to the cushion beside me. The escalation built layer by layer, guilt to smears, threats to isolation, each one designed to pull me back into the fold, to fund their flight at my expense. But in the quiet that followed, your counsel echoed, boundaries as courage, truth as stewardship. I wouldn't fold, not this time. The rain returned that night, tapping the roof like insistent fingers, but I lay awake, resolve hardening against the storm. If this story already has your heart, hit the like button. It helps the story of Margaret reach more people who still believe in humanity. The weeks dragged on like shadows lengthening at dusk, farther, each day pulling me deeper into a quiet unraveling that no one else could see. I'd taken to walking the neighborhood after my shifts, the clinic's fluorescent hum fading behind me as I traced the cracked sidewalks lined with sycamores, their leaves turning brittle underfoot. The air carried the faint rot of fallen fruit from the corner yard, a reminder of seasons shifting without mercy. My purse swung heavy at my side, the confirmation slip from the bank, tucked inside like a talisman, but the retaliation's echoes lingered. Elena's posts scrubbed from the group, but whispered about in passing glances at the post office, David's unanswered voicemails stacking like unpaid bills. I avoided the house during those hours, letting the empty rooms wait. Their silence, a canvas for doubts that painted me as the architect of my own isolation. It was during one such walk, as the sun dipped low and painted the rooftops in bruised oranges, that the first thread of the deeper truth snagged. My phone buzzed in my pocket, not David this time, but his sister, Laura, the one who'd always been the good child in my mind. Steady with her teaching job upstate and weekend visits that felt like lifelines. Her calls had been sparse since the fallout, laced with that careful neutrality, but this one came through clear, her voice warm over the line as I paused by the park bench, its slats damp from an earlier mist. "Mom, I need to see you, in person. There's something you should know." No urgency in her tone. Just that measured calm she'd inherited from her father, the one that made you trust without question. I agreed, suggesting the diner on Main, the one with its vinyl booths cracked like old skin and coffee that brewed strong enough to cut through fog. We met the next evening, the diner's neon sign flickering against the twilight, casting red pools on the parking lot gravel. Inside, the air hummed with the sizzle of the grill and the low murmur of locals hunched over plates of meatloaf, silverware clinking like distant chimes. Laura arrived first, her coat draped over the booth back, a notebook clutched in her hands. Plain, spiral-bound, the kind teachers use for lesson plans. She looked older than her 35 years, lines etching her forehead that hadn't been there last Christmas when we'd trimmed the tree together, tinsel catching the lights like fragile stars. I slid in across from her, the vinyl sticking to my slacks, and ordered black coffee, its steam rising bitter between us. She didn't waste words, pushing the notebook toward me with a steady hand, her nails short and practical. "I found these in David's old box at my place, the one he shipped before they moved in with you. Emails, mostly from a year ago." I opened it slowly, the pages rustling soft, revealing printouts dated back to the flood that had driven them to my door. David's name at the top, addressed to a realtor in the city, subject line, "Equity options for family property." My breath caught. The words blurring under the diner's harsh lights. Inquiries about reverse mortgages, about adding spouses to titles for quick access, projections of selling the house outright once the current owner transitions to assisted living. Transitions. The euphemism chilled me, evoking sterile rooms and faded photos on nightstands. My life reduced to a footnote in their plan. But it deepened from there, Father, the secret motive uncoiling like smoke from the grill vents. Further down, an email chain with Elena's account, casual at first. We wait it out, build equity. Mom's savings can cover us till then. Then sharper, hidden debt from my cards, 15K, can't let her know or she'll cut us off. Debt. Not the emergencies I'd funded, but a mountain they'd buried. Credit lines maxed on salon equipment Elena never used. Nights out David chased to forget his stalled dreams. They'd moved in not just for shelter, but to mine me, to use the house as collateral, my retirement as a buffer against their unraveling choices. The realtor's reply sealed it. With co-ownership, you could refinance quietly. Inheritance laws favor family, but speed things up now. Inheritance. The word twisted, revealing the control they'd craved, not temporary help, but a takeover disguised as gratitude. I looked up at Laura, the coffee cooling untouched, its surface rippling from my trembling hand. Why show me this now? She leaned in, voice dropping below the diner's hum, her eyes shadowed with something like regret. Because I'm part of it, Mom, or I was. Complicit. The admission landed soft, but shattered everything. The good daughter, the one who'd praised their stay during visits, nodding along to Elena's stories of helping out. Turns out she'd known about the debts early on, even wired them a few hundred once, whispering to David over phone calls I'd overheard, but dismissed as sibling banter. I thought it was temporary, she said, twisting her napkin into shreds. But when they started talking liens, I pulled back, told David to come clean. He begged me to stay quiet, said it was for Mia, for the family legacy. Legacy. As if my home, built from my husband's sweat and my endless shifts, was theirs to gamble away. The realization bloomed then, stark as the diner's fluorescent glare on the Formica table. They valued me only for my utility, Father, a roof over debts, a bank for their failures, a stepping stone to the life they couldn't build alone. Not for the woman who'd rocked David through fevers, taught Laura to bake bread with yeast that rose like hope, held them both when grief hollowed us after the funeral. I was the enabler, the silent pillar propping their illusions, until I threatened to crumble. Laura reached across, her hand covering mine briefly, warm but fleeting. I'm sorry, I should have spoken sooner. But apologies couldn't mend the reframing. The way love had been a mask for extraction, family a contract I'd signed in blood and savings, only to be discarded when the terms shifted. We parted outside, the night air crisp, carrying the tang of frying oil from the exhaust vents. Laura hugged me tight, her coat brushing my cheek, but the embrace felt hollow now, tainted by her silence. I drove home through streets slick with dew, the headlights carving tunnels in the dark, the notebook on the passenger seat like evidence in a trial I'd never wanted. The house welcomed me with its quiet creaks, the porch light buzzing as I locked the door, but inside, the truth reframed every memory, the nursery paint I'd applied alone, the meals I'd stretched, the boundaries I'd erased in the name of blood ties that ran one way. Sleep came fitful that night, the bed's sheets twisting around me, dreams laced with gravel crunching under suitcases and whispers of equity that echoed like betrayals. In the morning, the weight settled deeper, a haunting clarity that no counsel could soften. Not yet. But it was there, undeniable. The utility I'd been reduced to, the motives that had poisoned the well from the start. The truth from Laura's notebook settled over the house like a fine dust, coating every surface with its unrelenting weight. I carried it with me that next morning, Father, slipping the printouts into a manila folder and tucking it under my arm as I dressed for the day. The mirror in the hallway reflected a woman I'd almost forgotten. Hair pulled back simply, blouse ironed crisp, eyes steady, despite the shadows beneath them. No dramatic confrontation brewed in my chest, just a quiet resolve, born of the clarity you'd helped me find, to let the facts speak where words had failed. The kitchen clock ticked onward, its hands marking a path towards something resembling justice. Not the fiery kind from stories, but the slow, inevitable kind that comes from light piercing the dark. I started with documentation as you'd advised, expanding my own notebook into a fuller record. Seated at the oak table under the pendant light, its bulb casting a warm but unflinching glow, I transcribed everything. Dates of the transfers, Elena's casual requests that masked the deeper debts, the overheard whispers about the house now corroborated by those emails. My pencil scratched steadily across the pages, the lead leaving faint grey trails like veins exposed. Receipts from the clinic's old files, grocery runs I'd charged for their sake, joined the pile, each one a thread, pulling the narrative taut. It wasn't vengeance. It was stewardship, as you called it, a way to honor the truth without shattering more than necessary. By midday, the folder bulged, its edges worn from my handling, and I felt the first easing in my shoulders. As if naming the exploitation allowed on paper loosened its grip, allies emerged quietly, without fanfare. Laura called again that afternoon, her voice tentative over the line, as I stood by the living room window, watching leaves skitter across the lawn in the breeze. "I can't undo my silence, Mom, but I can stand with you now." She'd spoken to David the night before, confronting him in a motel parking lot under sodium lights that buzzed like accusations. His denials had crumbled, she said, his face paling as she read the emails aloud from her phone, the screen's glow illuminating the lies they'd both swallowed. He admitted the debts, the cards, the loans from Elena's side. No plan to pay you back, just riding it out. Her words carried no triumph, only the sorrow of a family fracturing further. She offered to join me at the bank, to witness any changes, and later that week we met Mrs. Ellis again, the office air cool with the hum of air conditioning. Laura's presence steadied me as we reviewed the folder, her hand briefly on my arm, when the manager confirmed no liens had been filed. Yet. "If they try," Mrs. Ellis said matter-of-factly, stamping a new account statement, "this record will show the intent. Courts don't favor hidden motives. No lectures, just facts laid bare, the paper's crispness, a shield I hadn't known I needed. Exposure came not through shouts or social media wars, but through a single measured conversation with the family elder, David's aunt, the one who'd first dismissed me as sensitive. I drove to her cottage that Sunday after church, the road winding through fields golden with late harvest, the radio silent save for the engine's low rumble. She met me at the door, her apron dusted with flour from afternoon baking, eyes narrowing behind her glasses as I handed over copies from the folder. "Read this, Aunt Helen," I said softly, settling into the rocker on her porch. The wood creaking under me like old bones. The air smelled of cinnamon, wafting from inside, mingling with the earthy tang of turned soil from her garden. She flipped through the pages slowly, her lips pursing at the emails, the debt tallies, Laura's notarized note affirming the details. No outburst from her, just a long silence broken by the distant hum of a tractor. "I thought you were imagining things," she admitted finally, folding the papers with care. "But this changes it. I'll talk to the others. No more whispers." Word rippled out from there, subtle as ripples on a pond. Eleanor's mother removed her post from the group, a quiet deletion that drew questions she couldn't answer without the truth surfacing. At church the following week, Mrs. Hargrove pulled me aside in the fellowship hall, the scent of brewed coffee thick around us, her hand light on my elbow. "Heard the full story from Helen. I'm sorry for jumping in." No grand apologies, just the erosion of the smears, the community's misreadings giving way to a hesitant understanding. David called once more, his voice stripped bare over the line as I sat in the kitchen, the evening light slanting through the blinds in golden bars. Laura showed me the emails. "Mom, we were wrong. Scared, stupid, the debts. They're ours to fix now." No begging for funds this time, just admission, laced with the weight of consequences. They'd moved into a cheaper rental, Elena picking up shifts at a salon across town, David applying for night classes to retrain. The motel life had forced the reckoning. The overdrawn cards frozen by collectors, utilities threatening cut-off without my buffer. It wasn't punishment handed down, it was the natural fallout of choices unmasked, their utility to each other tested without my shadow. The decisive boundary came last, in a letter I wrote by hand, the pen's nib pressing firm against the stationery, ink blooming slightly on the cream paper. Addressed to both of them, it outlined the facts from the folder. No accusations, just the record of what had been taken, what remained mine. "The house stays as it is," I wrote, the words steady in the lamplight. "Visit for Mia if you wish, but on terms of respect, not need. I've endured enough." I mailed it without copies. The post office's stamp a final seal, and waited. Their response arrived a week later. A card, Elena's handwriting neat. "We understand. Space for now." No threats, no lawyers, just acceptance, born of the exposure that left no room for denial. Justice unfolded in those small shifts, Father, the documentation that fortified my home, allies like Laura bridging the gaps, lies exposed in quiet corners where truth could breathe. Consequences fit the life we'd built, debts they now shouldered, a family circle redrawn without erasure. I stood on the porch that evening, the gravel still bearing faint tracks from old tires, and felt the air lighten, the oak tree's branches swaying gentle in the wind. No triumph swelled, only a somber peace, the kind that mends without erasing scars. The house stood solid behind me, its walls whispering of endurance turned to strength. Months passed like the slow turning of seasons, Father, each one layering a fragile patina over the raw edges of what had been. Winter came first, blanketing the gravel driveway in a hush of snow that muffled the world's clamor, turning the oak tree into a skeletal sentinel against the slate-grey sky. I'd wake to the frost-etching patterns on the bedroom window, intricate as the veins of a leaf, and lie there listening to the house settle, creaks and sighs that spoke of endurance, not collapse. The folder from those weeks of documentation gathered dust on the shelf in my closet now, its contents a relic of the storm. But I kept it close, a quiet testament to the boundaries I'd finally drawn. No more unannounced knocks at the door, no frantic texts pleading for one last favor. The silence was profound, not empty, but filled with the space I'd reclaimed for myself. I took to tending the herb garden out back again, the one Elena's family had trampled in their haste, kneeling in the thawed earth come spring, my hands sinking into the cool soil, fingers tracing the tender shoots of rosemary and thyme. I felt the dignity you'd spoken of take root. It wasn't grand, this reclamation, no parades or proclamations, but in the simple act of weeding out the invasives, pulling them free without remorse, I saw the parallel to my own life. The manipulation had disguised itself as love, wrapping around my generosity like vines choking a trellis, but truth had pruned it back. Compassion lingered, yes, for David, who called sporadically now, his voice stripped of entitlement, asking after my health rather than my wallet. For Elena, glimpsed once at the clinic with Mia in tow, her eyes averted but softer, as if the weight of exposure had humbled her edges. But compassion without self-destruction meant limits, a moral courage I'd learned the hard way. I invited them for Easter, the table set simply with lamb and bread from my oven, Mia's laughter bubbling like a spring after drought. No debts discussed, no apologies demanded, just presence, tentative and real, the first fragile bridge over the chasm. Faith in humanity flickered back to life in those small encounters, not as a blaze, but a steady lamp against the night. Laura visited more often, her car crunching up the drive on weekends, arms laden with groceries she insisted on sharing. We'd sit on the porch swing, the chains groaning softly in the breeze, sipping iced tea from jars beaded with condensation, and talk, not of the past's fractures, but of the present's quiet mending. "Family isn't blood alone," she'd say, her gaze on the horizon where the sun dipped low, painting the fields in amber. "It's the ones who choose to stay, even when it's hard." Her complicity had scarred us both, but redemption came through her actions now, helping me update the will, ensuring the house passed to those who'd honored it, not exploited it. And at church the whispers had faded, replaced by nods of quiet respect from Mrs. Hargrove and the others, their earlier judgments dissolving like mist under morning light. Humanity, I learned, holds both shadows and sparks. The key is discerning which to nurture, which to let go. What family really means haunted my reflections in the still hours, Father, when the house wrapped around me like an old shawl, comforting in its familiarity. It wasn't the endless endurance I'd mistaken it for, the silent funding of others' lives at the cost of my own. Nor was it the isolation I'd feared, alone on a porch, watching suitcases roll away. Family, true family, emerged as those bonds forged in mutual respect, boundaries respected, truths shared without fear of unraveling. David and Elena crossed that line sporadically now, Mia's visits a balm that mended without demanding erasure. She'd toddle through the kitchen, chubby hands reaching for the cookie jar on the counter, her giggles echoing where arguments once hung heavy. "Grandma's house," she'd say, patting the walls with sticky fingers, and in that innocent claim I saw redemption, not a fairy tale restoration, but a redefinition. They'd paid back a portion of the debts in installments, small checks arriving like olive branches, no fanfare attached. It wasn't full restitution, but it signaled change, a quiet justice where consequences taught what lectures never could. Yet the haunting lingered, a somber undercurrent to the piece. In the evenings, as twilight seeped through the curtains, casting long shadows across the living room rug, I'd trace the faint marks where toys had once scattered, reminders of the utility I'd been reduced to, the love disguised as leverage, the betrayal's echo whispered in quiet moments, a dull ache like rain tapping on the roof. But it no longer defined me. Dignity, once eroded, now stood firm, a quiet strength drawn from the well of self-respect. I'd endured not as a doormat, but as a woman learning her worth, turning silent suffering into a voice that commanded space. Faith in humanity persisted, fragile as the first green of spring, rooted in the belief that even fractured ties could heal if truth led the way. You saw it in our last session, Father, that afternoon in your office, with the sun slanting through the blinds in golden shafts, the scent of blooming lilacs drifting from the garden outside. I sat straighter in the leather chair, hands folded without trembling, and shared these reflections, the garden's resilience, Mia's unburdened joy, the reimagined family that honored rather than hollowed. You nodded, your eyes kind as ever, the cross on the wall catching the light like a beacon. "Redemption isn't perfection," you said softly, "but the courage to rebuild on truth." I left with that, the door clicking shut behind me, stepping into a world that felt wider, less shadowed. The house waited, solid and mine, its walls no longer echoing with neglect, but humming with possibility. In the end, Father, it was the quiet justice of living authentically, boundaries as sentinels, compassion as a choice, family as a circle drawn by consent. The gravel driveway gleamed under summer sun now, free of suitcase tracks, ready for whatever steps came next. And in that readiness I found a haunting peace, the kind that lingers like a half-remembered hymn, affirming that dignity endures, Humanity redeems, and true family weathers the storm to stand renewed. Subscribe for more stories of compassion, justice, and redemption. Thank you for watching the case of Did You Ask the Owner for Permission? See you in the next one.